questions.
Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, Canada had one of the best public health care networks in the world that should have detected the oncoming pandemic. It was respected by all, but unfortunately, a few months before the pandemic, the health minister scrapped this early warning unit. An investigation was launched into Health Canada by the minister herself. Why has she set this test for herself after having failed it? The Honourable Minister. Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for your question. Mr. Speaker, public health intelligence is vital to identifying and monitoring outbreaks. From the start of COVID-19 outbreak, the Global Public Health Intelligence Network has been an important source of public health intelligence for PHAC. We were very concerned over reports that GPIN analysts were not able to proceed with their important work. Mr. Speaker, we will be conducting an independent review of these changes to make sure that this vital tool continues to inform decisions to protect Canadians well into the future.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, an independent review on their own mistake. The government turned off Canada's pandemic early warning system in 2019 without an explanation. Today, he describes it as vital. This system was vital. It was 20% of the world's pandemic intelligence information. It helped stop H1N1 and Ebola. The Liberal chose to ignore the warnings of our security experts and instead began to rely on open source data from China. This government puts lives at risk when they shut down Canada's early warning pandemic system. Why?
Good question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much to the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, again, we see this as a vital tool. It's very important that this tool is able to contribute the intelligence to our country in the future. We will be conducting this independent review to make sure that this vital tool continues to inform decisions to protect Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, another vital tool is rapid testing. And this spring, the absence of it has consequences being felt across the country. Lab workers here in Ontario are feeling it. One told the Ottawa Citizen, everyone is working crazy amounts of hours to try and get all the tests we get in a day done, and it's just not possible. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister admit his failure to approve rapid diagnostic testing is leading to the burnout in our frontline healthcare workers?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I thank the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we know that Canadians need access to better and faster testing, no matter where they live. We have been working around the clock on the approval and procurement of new testing technologies. Mr. Speaker, we heard yesterday the Prime Minister in this House announced the approval of the Abbott ID Now point-of-care test and an order for 7.9 million units of this. We will continue working with industry, provinces and territories like we have, Mr. Speaker, since day one when COVID hit our shores.
Before we continue, I just want to remind the honourable members the way it works is we ask a question and there's an answer. We can't keep throwing questions at people to confuse things. I just want to make sure that everybody's got the rules down right. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, they're working around the clock and getting nothing done.
That's right.
In Calgary, the Foothills Hospital has 300 workers who have had to quarantine because of COVID exposure. No hospital can lose 300 frontline workers. If these workers had access to rapid tests, they'd already be back at work. But the Prime Minister says they have to wait weeks. If the next hospital is in BC or Manitoba, will the Liberal government once again blame the provinces for the Prime Minister's own failures?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, from day one, we have been great partners with the provinces and territories, getting them the investments that they need to come up with the ability to increase the capacity for rapid testing. Mr. Speaker, when I say that we've been working around the clock, we've been working around the clock. And I want to take a moment, Mr. Speaker, to thank the public health officials in Canada, the bureaucrats, the public servants that have truly been working around the clock for the betterment of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, Health Canada works closely with companies applying for authorization in Canada so that we can provide multiple testing options for all Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the slowness of this government is quite simply unacceptable. Quebecers in the Ottawa area have to wait 7 days for their test results, despite the purchase of new machines. The Outaouais Medical Centre is still awaiting Health Canada's approval for the use of one of the most heavily used machines in the world. Mr. Speaker, why is the government taking its sweet time when we're in a national crisis? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
On this side of the House, we believe in science and evidence. I get the impression, Mr. Speaker, that the member across the way, if he were in this position on this side of the House, would put the iron fist down to the Health Canada scientists, to the people that are working hard on evidence-based decisions, and make a political decision. Mr. Speaker, we can't have politics interfering on the outcomes that we are looking for here.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, we're in a full health crisis, and more than ever, people need high-quality health care. It's time to cooperate with Quebec to support our healthcare workers and protect our seniors. Quebec needs and is calling for an increase in health transfers in order to effectively combat COVID. Yesterday, what did they answer? The Liberals said, we're not a bank machine for Quebec. Make do with your equalization payments. That's what the Liberals are proposing. Nice cooperation, Mr. Speaker. Quebecers need better health care. They want increased transfers. What is Ottawa waiting for? The Honourable Minister. My colleague talks about cooperation, and in fact, we transferred $113 million for healthcare immediately. There's another $750 million for tests and for personal protection equipment, $167 million for vulnerable populations, almost $300 million for home care. That's beyond the figures. That's a sign of concrete cooperation with all Quebecers. Even if the Bloc doesn't like it, that's the reality. The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, 81% of Quebecers want the government to increase health transfers, and 73% of Canadians. The National Assembly of Quebec is unanimous. The premiers of all the provinces want increased transfers. They showed that there was an immediate shortfall of $28 billion. The federal government boasts about transferring $500 million. That's not even 2%, and we're in a pandemic. When will the government take this seriously and meet Quebec and the province's calls for increased transfers? The Honourable Minister. First of all, Mr. Speaker, the government of Quebec is quite capable, is doing a good job. It can speak for itself, and we're discussing things with them. They don't need the Bloc here in the House as a middleman. They can speak to us directly. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, we've transferred $11.6 billion to Quebec for health care. So we know there's a squabble here, but there is no squabble. They're looking for one where there isn't. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 years ago, the Liberal government announced the Infrastructure Bank. And after 3 years, basically they haven't delivered the goods. Nothing's been built to show that it actually works. What they have done is help their cronies. They've given big salaries to their cronies, but they haven't invested in building any new infrastructure. So my question, when is the Liberal government truly going to invest in infrastructure instead of just making beautiful announcements? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I am always happy to... Mr. Speaker, I'm always pleased to speak about our infrastructure program, which creates great projects all around the country, thousands of projects that create good jobs and are building a healthier future. Today we announced with Michael Sabia, who's very well known all across Canada, including in Quebec, that we're going ahead with a $10 billion project to do retrofits for electric buses, and for a transition to a cleaner economy. That will create 60,000 jobs, and people in Montreal know how well the infrastructure program is working.
Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that the Liberals are going to make great announcements. They made another great announcement. But they've only actually funded 9 projects in 3 years, and none of those projects are actually completed. It's a great announcement tool, but they actually haven't built infrastructure. For 3 years, what have they done? Well, they certainly have enriched their close friends. They got great salaries, but they're just making announcement after announcement, but they're not actually building things in communities. They're not building infrastructure. So my question is, when will the Liberal government admit that this infrastructure bank was just an announcement ploy and start investing directly in projects that people need?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm always proud to talk about the infrastructure investments that we're making across the country, including the members' very riding. We've invested in thousands of projects that are creating jobs across the country and building cleaner and more inclusive communities. We know the REM project in Montreal that's funded by the Canada Infrastructure Bank has created thousands of jobs and is advancing quickly. Today's announcement is a demonstration that under the leadership of Michael Sabia, we are going to get even more built. That $10 billion investment that will crowd in the private sector will mean retrofits in buildings across the country. It will mean more electric buses and better public transportation, irrigation.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first responsibility of a federal state is the borders, and everyone recognizes that the government dragged its heels in that area when the pandemic hit. The Prime Minister said he was following WHO advice, and here today in the New York Times, we learn that the WHO was basing its decisions on policy and politics rather than scientific evidence. So why did the government wait so long before closing the border when that's what common sense called for? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And quite frankly, I would disagree with the characterization that there was any delay. Our government acted with, I think, remarkable speed in closing our borders and to placing appropriate restrictions on international travel. It was unprecedented and frankly, prior to the pandemic, almost incomprehensible. But we acted quickly to put in place strong restrictions on non-essential travel and to take the action necessary to keep Canadians safe. And that has been effective, Mr. Speaker. And at the same time, we were able to maintain important supply lines so that goods and services and essential workers could continue to do their job of serving Canadians.
The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, we asked the Minister of Health in March why her government had not shut down international travel or established testing requirements at our airports. She stated their decision to allow flights to continue and not require screening was based on the best scientific evidence from Canada with the World Health Organization recommendations. The New York Times has now revealed that the WHO's advice was never based on science. Will the minister now explain why she risked the health of Canadians and continued to defend policies based on politics rather than science?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, and I thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we have used science and evidence from day one. I will disagree with the member's comments, the member's question. Science has evolved in this process. We've learned through this process, and when we think, Mr. Speaker, when we think about this resurgence, we know so much more now than we knew before. We have so much more knowledge about COVID-19 than we had back in January. And the response, the Canadian response, Mr. Speaker, has been driven from day one by evidence and science, and it will continue.
The honourable member for Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, for months the COVID pandemic has ravaged our economy. 9,000 Canadians have lost their lives. Many more are hospitalized. And we now know that last year the health minister shut down Canada's pandemic early warning system. Can you imagine? When former Liberal health minister Ujjal Dosanjh, remember him? When he heard this, he called the minister's actions a colossal failure. To the minister, why did she shut down the system, and doesn't she realize that that early warning system could have saved many, many lives?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my friend from Abbotsford for the question. A question that's been asked earlier today, but Mr. Speaker, the same answer is the same answer. Public health intelligence is vital to identifying and monitoring outbreaks. We were concerned about reports that GFIN analysts were not able to proceed with their important work. From the start of COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, the Global Public Health Intelligence Network has been an important source of public health intelligence. That tool is a vital tool and needs to remain in the future. It needs to remain in the future as a tool of intelligence for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, today we read that the Health Minister ignored critical pandemic information and relied on intelligence from foreign governments. She prioritized information from China, of all places, rather than using public sources that would have told her how dangerous the virus really was. For months, the minister said the risk was low. Remember that? Now we find out that she shut down one of the most important tools to protect Canadians against this virus. Does the minister realize this is another wee charity in the making? Why should Canadians continue to trust her?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my friend from Abbotsford for the question. We were very concerned by reports that GFIN analysts were not able to proceed with their important work. And as I've said before, we will be conducting an independent review of these changes to make sure, again, that this vital tool continues to inform decisions to protect Canadians into the future. Public health intelligence is vital to identifying and monitoring an outbreak.
Député de Sherbrooke-Haute-Saint.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, shortly after leaving politics, Frank Baylis got a $237 million contract to produce medical equipment. This is a former Liberal MP. And since then, there have been contracts with many companies that are unknown. And the Liberal government is using confidentiality to avoid revealing which companies got these contracts. We'd like to know, are these contracts that have been made with cronies?
Ministre.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. Let me start by saying that we made all of our contracts public on our website at the end of July in the interest of full transparency for Canadians. With regards to the contract mentioned, that contract was actually with a company called FTI for $237 million for 10,000 ventilators. There's no contract with Frank Baylis. This contract that is referenced is with FTI, and so the question is actually irrelevant, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, this is another wee scandal in the making. So let's review. First, the Prime Minister destroyed our stockpiles of PPE on the eve of a global pandemic. Then he sent what little we had left to the Chinese communist regime. And now we learn he is slapping national security designations on government contracts for PPE. National security designations are meant for national defense, not cloaking public health contracts in secrecy. This is just another attempt by this government to avoid accountability. Mr. Speaker, what are the Liberals trying to hide this time?
Honourable Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, I need to highlight what I just said, which is that in the interest of full transparency, we revealed on our website at the end of July all of our contracts and suppliers. And I would like to take issue, therefore, with the insinuation that we are not acting in the interest of transparency. And I will say that we have now over 2 billion items of PPE in this country for Canadians, for frontline healthcare workers, and we will continue to act with vigor and diligence on their behalf. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. At midnight, most of Quebec went into red alert level. Restaurants and cultural industries have been completely shuttered for at least 28 days. In the throne speech, the government committed, quote, to target additional financial support directly to businesses which have temporarily shut down as a result of a local public health decision, unquote. This afternoon, the government of Quebec announced that it would be helping businesses. What's the federal government going to do for them in the very short run? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague for his important question. We are, of course, all in solidarity with those affected by the new restrictions imposed by the Quebec government. We've been there since the beginning with our entrepreneurs to ensure that they got through the first wave, and we will still be there in the second wave with various supports, whether it's the wage subsidy or other measures that we will be shortly announcing. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Joliette. Mr. Speaker, businesses are closed now in the red zone, and it's time to act now, not in a few months. Federal assistance, as I said, can't wait. Businesses need it now. For 6 months, the Bloc has been calling for support for overhead costs, and they still don't have that. The financial assistance for schools returning came after the kids had already gone back, and COVID beat the assistance to the punch. No kidding. Time's running out for many businesses. The time to act is now. What's Ottawa going to do? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had the opportunity to speak a number of times with the Quebec Minister of the Economy. And good news for entrepreneur. Assistance is coming. And similar to a lot of the steps we've taken, whether it's the wage subsidy or loans to small businesses, there's also the Economic Development Agency for Quebec regions, which got increased funding. And of course, we are very aware of what's going on currently with entrepreneurs all across the regions. We're watching it closely, and we will be there to help them. The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Temiskaming. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, small businesses like restaurants, bars, and theaters were the first to close down during the first wave. Today, they have to close down again because they're in red alert. And they can't afford to go into debt again. The Bloc has been saying for 6 months there has to be support for fixed costs to avoid bankruptcies. The survival of thousands of businesses depends on that. The government even agreed with us and voted in favor of our motion on April 11th. When is the government going to keep its word and announce genuine help for businesses with their fixed costs? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It goes without saying that we'll be there for our businesses. We've been there since the outset, and we will stay there. And that is why so many businesses have been able to keep their employees on the payroll, thanks to the wage subsidy. In the throne speech, we said we would be there still to help businesses and entrepreneurs in those regions that are affected. And that is our goal, to help those businesses and those workers. And so, yes, of course, we will take action and remain in solidarity.
Shut down the system that was supposed to warn us about pandemics. He cost people their lives and their jobs. The Prime Minister kept our borders open, knowing that the virus was entering our cities. He cost people their lives and their jobs. And in Ontario alone today, 82,000 people are waiting for test results because there are no rapid tests in our schools, in our place of work, in long-term care facilities, because the Prime Minister failed to get them. He is costing workers their jobs and people their lives. Why?
Good question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we were first alerted to an outbreak of pneumonia in late December 2019. Since then, we have been working together with all levels of government to respond to cases of COVID-19 in Canada. We have used science and evidence to inform our decision-making based on the data available. We know that this situation changes every day. We are working with experts, public health officials, and our partners, working together to keep Canadians safe.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
I stand with Kim McInnes in Dartmouth, who had to take 5 days off of work to wait for her toddler's COVID results. The best that this guy can do is stammer through his minister's talking points that lose something in translation from Beijing. He sat by and did nothing while the Liberals sent precious masks to other countries while our doctors went without. Disgusting. Why is the Prime Minister costing Canadians their lives and their jobs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, from day one, this government has been a partner with provinces and territories. We've invested heavily in ensuring that provinces, like my province of Nova Scotia, have the money to ramp up the capacity that they need. Mr. Speaker, my daughter had a test in Nova Scotia, and she had her test results back in 8 hours. Mr. Speaker, we have done great things with the provinces and territories, and we have an unprecedented level of cooperation and collaboration with these provinces and territories. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank those folks in the provinces and territories for working with the government, but we've made federal investments, Mr. Speaker, to help with that capacity.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
That's great. Liberals get their test results in hours, but Kim McInnes has to wait for 5 days for her kids. That's how this works with this government. A contract for Frank Baylis and special test results for the parliamentary secretary. You know what? This government needs to start standing with regular Canadians. They're the ones that are making the sacrifice. Right. The only sacrifice the Prime Minister has made is Bill Morneau. He is costing Canadians their lives and their jobs. When is he going to get his act together, and when are Canadians going to see a plan?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we've used science and we've used evidence to drive the Canadian response to this. What you will see on the other side of this House, Mr. Speaker, is you will see people that would, if they were in these positions on this side of the bench, they would make those decisions for scientists. They would make those decisions. They'd say, I'm sorry, if you're not at the stage yet where you can approve this, Mr. Speaker, across the way, they would rubber stamp that just because it makes good political sense.
Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, as a Vancouver Islander, I can attest to how important BC ferries are as a vital link to the mainland. And strict COVID-19 measures have kept people safer, including an exemption that let passengers stay in their vehicles. But despite an expected second wave and the objections of the Premier, the Provincial Medical Health Officer, passengers, and some ferry workers, the Liberals have rescinded that exemption and are insisting on cramming people onto the passenger decks, insisting that it is safe. Why is the Liberal government exposing passengers on BC ferries to risk? Do they really think Ottawa knows best?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on the issue of ferries and closed car decks, it is a difficult decision, but it is one that has to be made for reasons of marine safety. Closed decks on ferries are not safe places for passengers to be in case there were a fire or flooding or some other catastrophe. At this point in time, we have measures in place to ensure COVID safety on our ferries, and we hope that all people will understand that this is the proper way to go.
Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Canadians were horrified to see the appalling conditions our seniors are experiencing in long-term care centres across this country. 80% of the deaths from COVID-19 occurred in these facilities, giving Canada the worst record of all comparable nations. The situation is so bad, the armed forces had to be called in. As Canadians brace themselves for a second wave of this pandemic, families are extremely worried about their loved ones in long-term care. What is this government doing specifically to ensure that seniors will be better protected in the critical months ahead?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We will be there to support provinces and territories that need help managing their long-term care systems. Whether it's with the Canadian Armed Forces support, investment in PPE, or providing the $3 billion for essential workers' wages, know that the safety of seniors is our top priority. Under the Safe Restart Agreement, our government has provided $740 million to support one-time costs for measures to control and prevent infections. Our throne speech identified additional actions we'll take to strengthen long-term care in our country. We'll be there for our seniors. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Northwest Territories.
Mr. Speaker, I know our government has been outspoken in the past about opposing the United States administration's plan to open the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska to oil drilling, and that they could auction off drilling leases this calendar year. The ANWR is a critically important calving ground for the porcupine caribou herd And with the ongoing decline in many herds, we need to collectively protect them and assist in their recovery. What has Canada done, and what more can we do to address this incoming threat?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member of the Northwest Territories for his question and for both his and the member of Yukon's important work on this issue. As I said in the statement that I released in early September, the porcupine caribou herd is invaluable to the culture and subsistence of the Gwich'in and Inuvialuit peoples and to biodiversity in this country. This government has long advocated for the permanent protection of the herd's habitat, including in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. We have made strides to protect this herd through the establishment of important habitat areas, including 2 national parks, Ivevik and Vuntut. We have and we will continue to work together with our Indigenous and territorial partners to protect this iconic species.
L'honorable député de Richmond.
The honourable member for Richmond North Tabasco.
That we can do in order to really direct the country to go in the right direction. No matter what your beliefs are politically, I think you got to participate, because it's not going to help sitting in front of the television set and to argue and scream and say this is not done right and America is going the wrong direction or this politician is going the wrong direction. I always say, well, as it is not going to help you. You got to go out and vote. You got to go out and participate in a democracy. And so that's what this is. And as an immigrant, to me, I think it is extremely important that everyone is able to vote. So you guys are doing a great job at that. Any way that we can help, let us know. But that is.
That Canada is a country where everyone, regardless of their gender expression, gender identity, or sexual orientation, can lead a happy and authentic life and be loved. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Service in the Canadian Armed Forces is a commitment to defend our country, its institutions, and the rights enjoyed by our citizens. My service in the military taught me many lessons, but the importance of respecting the rights of my fellow citizens was paramount. J'ai terminé mon service.
I ended my services in the Canadian Armed Forces, and then I went to work in the private sector for a decade before becoming a member of Parliament. But I've always kept a deep respect for the rights of Canadians. My track record is clear. I've always voted in favor of the LGBTQ community.
4 months as a member of Parliament, my vote was one of a handful of Conservative votes that helped an NDP bill on gender identity to pass. I stood and was counted for rights that day. As a parliamentarian, I am here to secure the rights of every Canadian, including the LGBTQ community, and to build an inclusive and prosperous country for all. And now, as leader of the Conservative Party, I pledge to continue this work. I will also hold the Liberal government to account when they fall short and when they prefer to contrast their virtue in a way meant to castigate others. Let me be perfectly clear. Conversion therapy is wrong, and in my view, it should be banned. Encore une fois.
Once again, I'm going to be perfectly clear. Conversion therapy is bad. In my opinion, it should be banned.
Particularly the case when it could be threatened against someone against their will, or when it is used to denigrate or demean someone for who they are. But sadly, Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are once again playing politics. Instead of working hard to get things right and make life better for Canadians, they seem intent on scoring political points. Why do you think this bill is here on day 2 for me as a new leader in the House?
Exactly it.
Better yet, why do you think the Liberals have reintroduced the exact same bill they did last year, having totally ignored the well-known drafting failures from their first bill. They did this not because they want to get it right for the LGBTQ community. They did this because they want to force Conservatives to seek amendments or possibly even vote against this bill. Les libéraux.
The Liberals are playing petty politics as usual. They're trying to scare Canadians. They want to divide us.
Canadians are smarter than that, than the Liberals think they are, I should say. And I know that the LGBTQ community sees through this too. So I want to use my time to talk for a moment to the LGBTQ community. Some of you grew up in a home that didn't understand or support you. Many of you faced persecution at school, at work, out in public, at a restaurant, on a date, riding the subway, living life. For too many LGBTQ Canadians, that persecution may have even involved the threat of or the use of conversion therapy. To be forced to change who you are is not okay, Mr. Speaker. That's something I hope no Canadian ever endures again. And if that is the intent of this bill, it needs to be clearly written that way, Mr. Speaker. In fact, clarity is one of the goals of legislative drafting. But the Liberals know that clarity and sincerity don't always make for good wedge politics in the age of Twitter. The government knows that if the bill is more clearly drafted, they might lose their gotcha effect, which is becoming far too common in the politics we see to the south of us. The Liberals know that by ignoring the thoughtful advice they already received from parents, from teachers, from faith leaders, they create a situation that allows for people who ask a simple question about this bill to be shamed into silence or canceled on social media in the age of cancel culture. How is this, Mr. Speaker, fostering inclusion? In fact, many Liberal operatives are likely on social media right now claiming I'm being divisive because I would prefer that we get this bill right and not work to divide Canadians. The Liberal government knows that most Canadians do not want to see conversion therapy continue, but they also know that most Canadians don't want conversations between a parent or a child, or a teacher or a religious leader and a young person to be criminalized either.
I know that my LGBTQ friends want everyone to be treated with dignity and respect.
Vulnerable members of their community to be protected, and they want people who try and use conversion therapy to denigrate others to be prevented from doing that. I know they don't want to criminalize the conversations of others because a community that has been unfairly persecuted for generations does not want to start unfairly persecuting others. People need to be free to talk openly to people they trust in their family or their community. That could be about coming out. That could be about their orientation or their gender identity. It could also be about their own faith or their own personal life journey. They should feel free to talk to others without the fear of a public prosecution. Kids need more support from adults, not less. In an age when young people are swiping and texting more than talking and connecting, we should not be criminalized talking. Some very simple amendments could fix this if this bill is truly more than a political wedge. Conversion therapy should be banned to protect young people coming out as LGBTQ. Encore, les thérapies.
Once again, conversion therapy should be banned to protect young people who identify themselves as LGBTQ. I want everyone to be able to feel accepted in our society.
In the right way, Mr. Speaker, and make sure their support networks aren't jeopardized in the process. We will be seeking reasonable amendments to try to get to yes on this. I challenge the government to be reasonable as well. LGBTQ Canadians deserve a bill that can ban conversion therapy and remind Canadians that the rights of their fellow citizens are important to defend. They also deserve respect and honesty from their elected officials. And I hope that they see that from me, they can always count on honesty and commitment to their rights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, the government finally chose to not only to ban conversion therapy, but to criminalize it. And according to some people, conversion therapy is more torture than therapy. I'll be clear here. This practice, mostly proposed and conducted by religious groups, is based on the idea that homosexuality is bad. And not just bad. Oh, I'm not comfortable with that. No, bad. But they're saying that you're a bad person. You go to hell.
These people are crazy. This is going to be a disaster.